We'll get started. All right, and 3, 2, 1, here we go. All right, so welcome to the webinar number 4 of our 4-part series of Managing Angry Moments. Before we get started, we know that the presentation is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense. So any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. Some of the topics discussed in this webinar may be of sensitive nature and not appropriate for children, so we ask for parental discretion. And as you know, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on YouTube. I will send you the link. Though active participation is encouraged, you may simply follow along using the chat. Okay, so let's get started. Here we go. So this is workshop number 4. Managing anger through forgiveness. So we're going to do a quick review of what we learned last week, and then we're going to talk about managing forgiveness and then maintaining the new you. All of the things that you have learned and all of the things that you have hopefully put into practice, and you will hopefully be able to maintain those, I guess, new characteristics or new thoughts, so that you can continue being the new you and understanding where your anger comes from and then managing it that way. So we are going to do an overview. So we're going to do a quick review of last week. Then we're going to talk about forgiveness and letting go. We talked a little bit about letting go when we talked about the personal power grid. And that's something that I hope maybe you took a little bit of time this week to reflect on that. Because we have to remember that that personal power grid was not about accepting bad behavior or accepting situations that we're stuck in. It's about letting go of things that we cannot change and then choosing what we can do within that situation to make them better for us. So then we're going to talk about lapse and relapse, and then preventing relapse, and really just about preventing relapse of going back to our old habitual ways of thinking, habitual actions and reactions. And then going back to, okay, well, where did that reaction come from? Why did I go back to my old patterns? How am I going to go back to, I'm going to say, quote unquote, the new you? And then we're going to talk about resilience and self-care, because those are things that we sometimes forget to consider when it comes to managing anger. So last week, we talked about avoidance and escape strategies. And if I were to ask you, if you want to put something in the chat, what do you remember about avoidance and escape strategies? What's something that you remember, or something maybe that stuck, or maybe even something that you tried this week? What do you remember about avoidance and escape strategies? Did anybody try any of them this week? They are temporary. Yes, thank you for saying that. First thing, right? Taking a deep breath before reacting, plan something to get away from the issue. Yes, those are excellent, I guess, comments, right? We talked about them being not a permanent solution. They can be employed to reduce the tension created when dealing with an anger-generating situation. And just like you said, sometimes you need to step away from it to think about it. Sometimes you need a moment to take a deep breath, excuse me, before reacting. But they're not permanent solutions, but they're very effective in preventing further damage to the relationship, whether that relationship be personal or professional. Okay. So we talked about all of these different strategies. So we talked about a planned avoidance, right? When you know something is happening, like my friend who didn't go to her Thanksgiving dinner, or planned avoidance. Let's say if your in-laws are coming and you want to, plan to be a little bit less present when they're here, etc., right? Or avoidance by time delays. So if somebody sends you an email or is calling you and you're just not quite ready to respond, you take a minute, you say, I'm busy right now, I'll give you a call later on, or I'll write you a message, for example. Also, avoidance by seeking another method of responding. Okay, so if someone sends you a text and they're expecting a quick response, maybe you say, you know, I want to take the time to read it and think about how I'm going to respond. I'm going to send you an email later. Or we talked about planned escapes, right? If you're on a blind date, for example, and somebody calls you halfway through, or if you have to meet with somebody that you're not, I'm going to say, you know, not always either super keen on, or somebody that triggers you regularly, right? We talked about planned escape. How can you make sure that that won't happen, or that you don't have to stay in that particular situation for too long? We talked about distractions, and I remember telling you the story about my friend who has a daughter who will sometimes get very emotional, and with a mental health issue, she can't necessarily be rational at that time. So the distraction was, you know, to clap your hands or to say a funny word like hippopotamus. There was also a time where, when we talk about even distractions, it's more like another way of saying, you are getting upset right now, and I know that you're going to say something that you regret, so I'm going to step away. So we can talk about that as being either distraction, where you kind of stop that conversation or that situation in its tracks. And you can also include a timeout there. There was a point where I had to, my daughter had a very severe concussion and couldn't, I guess, regulate her emotions. And so when she was starting to get worked up, the distraction was, you know, have a seat. I'm going to be in this room. When you're ready to, you know, when you have calmed yourself down, or when you know that you're not going to say something that you know is going to hurt me, I'm going to be ready here, right? That could also be a time delay. That could be an avoidance. That could be a timeout. But we can always think of ways that we can minimize the damage. And that's really what's important. Okay. Any questions or comments about those? Have any of you used them this week, and did they work for you? Well, I hope that they did. Excuse me, goodness. Okay, so now let's talk about forgiveness. What do you know about forgiveness? So what comes to mind when I say the word forgiveness? Had some time off work. Oh, good. That definitely helps. Yes, yes. Sometimes just stepping away from either the people at work, the work at work, the stress at work. Sometimes you can't avoid things, right? Can't avoid on the work week, but took some time on Saturday to decompress. And that sometimes is all it takes, right? Sometimes we just need a break. And that's okay. We're allowed to do that. We're allowed to take mental health time. It doesn't have to be sick time. Sometimes if you wait too long, you will be sick. But if you take a half day or a full day, maybe even just a mental health day, sometimes we just need to step away, right? And that's really important to know, and important to listen to your body. I know that when I start to feel like I've had enough, my body starts to give me the signs that if you don't take today off, or if you don't take some time off, you're going to get sick. And when I get sick, it's very rare, but it's because I didn't listen to my body. So sometimes all we need is to let go, take a deep breath, step away, take some time off, go somewhere else. And now that we can actually see other locations, you can, you can be a good, it would be good for you. So what do you know about forgive? Okay, so is this the response to what is for a Christian duty? Okay, now so forgiveness is letting go. Okay, wonderful. Anything else? What comes to mind about forgiveness? What does forgiveness mean to you? Making amends. Okay, excellent. Making amends. Sometimes that's what happens with forgiveness. Okay, interesting. All right, well, let's talk about forgiveness. Okay, forgiveness is closure, freeing yourself as well. Okay, those are beautiful. If you forgive, you no longer have to think about or stew in it. Oh, good one. Very good one, right? This is the whole letting go thing. So if you do it for yourself, you don't necessarily do it for another person, right? Excellent. So forgiveness, there's a lot of different things that people think about forgiveness, and it could have something to do with how you were raised, or it could have something to do with, what you were taught in school, or how your parents told you. But let's talk about some of the 5 myths about forgiveness, because for some of us, it could be kind of a skewed, I'm going to say a skewed view, but so for some, okay, forgiveness, let's talk first about what forgiveness is not. Okay, so forgiveness, forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Forgiving doesn't mean forget. And sometimes we think, I'll only forgive when I no longer think about it, or I no longer can remember what happened, or that I'm forgetting about, how it hurt me, etc. So forgiving is not the same as forgetting. Okay. Now, the next one is forgiving. What forgiveness is not, forgiving is the same as excusing. And that's really important. When we forgive someone, it doesn't mean that what they did was okay, or that we are forgiving that the behavior was bad. So forgiving is not the same as excusing. It doesn't mean that when we forgive someone that we are okay with what they did. It's almost the opposite, right? We're not excusing them. Well, we'll talk about what forgiveness is in a minute, but forgiveness is not the same as excusing. Okay, so the next one is forgiving is the same as reconciling. So for some people think that, if we forgive, then we have to reconcile or re-become acquainted or friends, or that we have to connect again, right? So again, for some, forgiving is the same as reconciling. For some, forgiving means or makes you weak, right? For some, forgiveness or asking for forgiveness is very difficult. And a lot of the times we hear that, if I say I'm sorry, it's because I've given in, or I'm the weaker one. And forgiving, for some, can be the hardest thing to do. But when we think about what forgiveness is, we'll talk about what forgiveness is in a minute, but remembering that forgiveness is not weakness. And for some, and this one is often, I find, the strongest hold, is that forgiving depends on the other person acknowledging the wrongful behavior. So for some, we have to have an apology before we can forgive someone. So that's very interesting, and there's quite a few people that have been sort of through my classes and through the years, and I've heard this sometimes where, I will never forgive so-and-so because they never apologized to me, or I'll never be able to let this go because they never said that they were sorry. And what's unfortunate for some of those people, that the person that they want an apology from has passed away. And so they're going to be holding on to this anger forever because they haven't gotten an apology. And that's what's very difficult. Some people can't acknowledge they're wrong, but it will constantly be on their mind if deep down they know they were wrong. Yes. And that's very true. And a lot of people, like you said, either won't acknowledge or won't say that they were wrong, or that they'll even admit, like you were saying, can't acknowledge that they were wrong. It will affect them, and it will sometimes eat them, within their bodies. But the other unfortunate thing is that for some, they don't even know that they did something wrong. And the person on the other end is still upset, 15 years later, about something that about something that the person who did the wrong didn't even know that they did. And that's what's really hard about forgiveness, is that if you're waiting for someone to say they're sorry, number one, you may never get it. 2, that other person may have passed on. 3, that person might not even understand or know or even have any idea how much that they hurt you. Allowing ourselves to accept that we will never receive the apology we deserve. This is strength. That's very true. And actually, I think I have that quote in the presentation. That's excellent. And it's very true, right? Forgiveness is a very tricky thing, because if 2 people have 2 different views about forgiveness, and remember, this goes right back to the very beginning. What is perception? How is our perception? Our perception is that they did something wrong. Their perception is that they didn't. Or, my perception is that I need someone to say that they're sorry because that's how I grew up. That's my experience. Whereas the other person, might not ever say it because they think that asking for forgiveness is weakness. So we have, so many people with different views and different feelings when it comes to forgiveness, and forgiveness is very powerful, right? Forgiveness, let's talk about what forgiveness is, okay? Forgiveness. Okay, so forgiveness. Oh my goodness. Forgiveness is a non-verbal concept. Now, when we think about forgiveness, a lot of the times we always think, well, I'm sorry, right? You hear the words, I'm sorry. But what's interesting about forgiveness, finally connected, poor Gary. Okay, forgiveness is a non-verbal concept, and it's an emotional experience. So when we think about forgiveness, and we saw this a little bit in the chat I can't see it right now, but there was a letting go. It was about almost a release. And forgiveness, when we think about asking for forgiveness or even giving someone else forgiveness for what they did to you without hearing the apology, it's an emotional experience. It is something that we choose to do because we need to let go of the hurt. And that's something that when we think about forgiveness, we often forget. It has nothing to do with the other person. It has everything to do. And just like I said from the very beginning as well, is that when we talk about anger management, we talk about, changing our perceptions. We talk about the personal power grid. It's so that you no longer hurt. You no longer get triggered as often, so that you are not being affected emotionally, physiologically, because that's hurting you. And no one else is going to be able to change that for you. This is really just about you. So forgiveness is an emotional experience, and it's in an internal state. You need to choose to let it go. You need to choose to decide to even start the process of forgiveness, because it's a long process. It's not something that is something that we choose to do and then the next day we're like, okay, I'll let it go. It's not. And I like this freedom part, is that we no longer hold to the ball and chain of the pain that someone has caused us. So forgiveness, it involves a process of dissolving feelings of anger, resentment, and or hatred towards an individual. And this is, again, something that we have to choose to do, because for a lot of the times when we've been hurt, it's something that comes up regularly, or we ruminate about it, or we think about it, or every time we see that person, it comes up. Every time we see, maybe there's triggers, or maybe every time we hear a certain word, for example, it'll trigger us. So we have to really think about, this is an internal state and experience that we choose to get into the process of dissolving these feelings. So basically, to cease resenting and wanting to punish an offense, flaw, or mistake. And that's the dictionary definition, right? To cease resenting and wanting to punish an offense, flaw, or mistake that someone has caused. So let's talk about what forgiveness is. We talked about what it isn't, right? But let's talk about what it is. Okay, so forgiveness involves one person, and that's you. If you choose to forgive somebody or something about what they've done, this is an internal choice. Like we said, it's a decision that you make. Forgiveness is an act of will to enter into the process of change. It is a choice. It can be directed towards an organization or government as well. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be one specific person. It has to be a situation that caused you some distress. It can be, any situation, whether it comes from an organization, whether it comes from a person, whether it comes from a situation. This is something that we have to remember, that we can't control those other things. We can only control ourselves, and that's how we enter into the decision, the process of learning or of letting go. Okay. So forgiveness is peace of mind. It's letting go, right? Just like you were saying, it's freedom, it's peace of mind, it's letting go. Forgiveness means we will be less emotionally reactive in relation to someone who has hurt us. So we will no longer react emotionally. We will no longer bring up or ruminate or get angry or frustrated or triggered every time we see or hear that person or that particular situation. And it can be difficult and can take time. Again, forgiveness is not something that we do at the snap of a finger. Forgiveness is something that we do that is a choice. It's a process. It takes some time. We also have to choose to do it willingly. This is not something, oh, I really should, let go of this particular situation. What's interesting is throughout the years, I've met some incredible people through my classes, and there was this one gentleman who you could just feel how angry and hurt that this man had been. And we did this class, and then the next day, and then the next week he came and he said, I forgave that guy in grade 5, and I no longer felt like I needed to punish him for what he did to me in grade 5. So he's been holding on to this for maybe 4 or 5 decades. And he'd been holding on to the resentment and the hurt for years. And of course, this was just scratching the surface. And yeah, yikes, right? But it was amazing that even just that one little situation that he said he finally let go of and he finally forgave, he said it was like a boulder lifted off of his shoulders. And this is something that it's a decision. It's for you to no longer feel that hurt. And if one little rock out of his mountain of hurts can make a difference like that, you could see the difference in his body posture, in his face and his emotions. And he'd been holding on to this for decades, like I said. So it can take time. It's not something that you snap your fingers. So, take the time. Forgiveness is not something we do for other people. It's something we do for ourselves to move on. And that's what's really important. And it's important to remember is that we do this for ourselves. This has nothing to do with the other people. And when we think about, people who need to hear an apology, and for some, like I said, one person in my class said that she will never forgive her mother, but her mother had passed. And so, for her to decide never to let that pain go, whether or not she heard an apology, she will never hear the apology, right? So we can't always hold on to things that we can't control. We can control the choice to make to let go. So what is resentment then, if I were to ask you the question? What is resentment? So personal conflict. Okay. Lingering hurt. Yeah. Lingering negative emotions from past experiences. Bad feeling. Begrudged feelings towards someone or something. Great. Bitterness. Yes. Negatively steals your energy. Oh, yes. Right. Not letting go. Perfect. So resentment is exactly all of that. It's the opposite of forgiveness, right? It's the opposite of forgiveness. And anger and ill will in view of real or imagined wrong. So resentment is that bitterness, it's that grudge, that holding on to things, something that you may never forgive or let go of. So this is the opposite of forgiveness. So when we hold on to grudges, we bring the bitterness and anger into relationships and new experiences. Again, if you can imagine a hurt or a grudge or resentment as a ball and chain, right? Something that's attached to your leg. So you're going to be constantly dragging this thing around because you haven't let go of it yet, and you're bringing it into all of your new experiences. So you start with that. When you start new experiences, you start with that this person might be like the last person. This person might do the same thing as the last person, or maybe have already, guilty until proven innocent. And that's sometimes something that we do, right, in new relationships or new experiences. Grudges can take away enjoyment of the present, right? We can't necessarily enjoy everything because we're still holding on to the pain of the past. It can bring on depression or anxiety, or, as we said, when we hold on to negative things, or when we bring up the feeling of, yes, negative people, exactly. When we bring on physiological damage that we know cortisol does, or stress or anger because of the I'm going to say the mountain, right? The anger mountain, the crisis point, all of those things can create negative health issues. And loss of valuable and enriching connections with others and prevents progression, right? So when we hold on to all of these different negative emotions, or we hold on to, the thought of other people who are just as negative, or who have caused us pain, or that they don't know, or maybe that they haven't asked for forgiveness yet. This is something that we do for ourselves. So when we think about, how can I let go of something that's causing me a lot of hurt that I will never hear an apology for? I need to do it for myself, because it's no longer worth it for me. It's not bringing me any good. It's not serving me. So now I need to think about, what's the process? How can I let this go? So what would be then the benefits of forgiving? What are some benefits of forgiveness? When we think about relief, so it could be a feeling of relief, like a boulder off of our chest. We can move on. It's cathartic. It is, right? It helps moves us in the right direction. You no longer have to hold on to the emotional weight. And it's amazing because the emotional weight feels very physical. So we are aware, it raises our spirits, our mood changes. It really does. It's good for your mind. We have healthier relationships. It brings us peace. You guys are amazing. This is so great. It's greater psychological well-being. Like you were saying, it brings you peace. You have better state of mind, better moods, right? So it's better for all of our relationships, all of our new relationships, or maybe it just makes our current relationships healthier. We have less stress and hostility, okay? Because we know that when we hold on to anger or stress, or when we don't do anything to take care of ourselves, our fuse, we talked about that fuse being shorter and shorter. And so when we forgive, or when we let go of some of that stress, it makes our fuse a lot longer. So we're not feeling as reactive, okay? It can lower our blood pressure. You are a better person, absolutely, right? Because you no longer bring that anger and frustration and almost a feeling of deceit into all new relationships or all new conversations, right? We're no longer that negative person holding on to the past. And this is what's great about being that new you, right? We've let that past go. We have decided to let it go. And we'll talk about the process of forgiving in a few minutes. But when we talk about fewer symptoms of depression, anxiety, chronic pain, and also lowers the risk of alcohol and substance abuse. When we talk about any type of addiction, a lot of the times we think addiction is something that people who don't have any, not moral power, but no, I'm going to say, I don't know. There's a lot of things we say about people with addictions, but it's really about when we're hurt. Addictions, what we choose to use in terms of a substance, helps us not feel, or not feel the hurt, feel a different feeling than the pain that we're feeling. And so when we talk about benefits of forgiving or letting go or of finally moving forward, yeah, it helps us. When we talk about the drug of choice, it's about coping and hiding and minimizing the feelings of the pain, right? So when we think about this and we think about forgiving, we no longer feel that pain because we've let it go, right? And we no longer have to use addictive substances or even just coping escape strategies to drown out those thoughts. So life becomes easier when you learn to accept an apology you never got. And this is really where, some people really need to consider, if you believe that you can only let go of something when someone asks you for forgiveness, you might be holding on to something for a very long time. So how can we forgive others? Well, the first thing we need to do is decide. We need to decide or declare to yourself your intention to forgive, to stop seeking revenge, retaliation, to stop allowing bitterness and anger to take over. So the first thing that needs to happen is we need to decide or declare. And this is, again, a personal decision. This is not something that you can do easily, but it is a choice. Number 2 is recognize your hurt and anger. Allow yourself to feel this hurt and acknowledge that a wrong was committed. This is not about, again, excusing. This is not about, telling yourself that it wasn't so bad. It did hurt you. And this is where you have to say, you know what, I was really hurt by this. I can't change it. I can't go back and make it different, but I can understand that, it was hurt. I was hurt. And then acknowledge that the situation has affected your life, health, and well-being. But then you need to either choose or end the relationship, right? This is where, I know that I've been hurt in the past. I know that this person, did something that caused me a lot of grief. I can choose to end the relationship. I can choose to renew the relationship. I can choose to move on. This is really a choice. But the first thing that needs to happen is you need to decide to do it. And it has to be a genuine decision. It's not like I really should let go of this. It's I will let go of this, and this is how I'm going to do it. So forgiveness also means that we change our old patterns of belief and actions that are driven by our bitterness. And that's something that a lot of the times for some, we have had such a pattern of behavior due to this particular bitterness. The way we either talk or lash out or behave, it's become a pattern, and we need to change our old patterns, and change is difficult. So we need to choose to make that change. And sometimes we need to choose to feel, choose to let go, choose to open ourselves, choose to even sometimes talking to someone else about it. It can just release the pain. Creating positive thoughts about the other person helps, right? And sometimes understanding that their perception is different. Maybe they didn't know any better. Maybe they never learned, how to behave around this particular situation, right? We don't know where the other person is coming from, and they're probably coming from a huge world of hurt if they felt that they needed to hurt you. And oftentimes, like you said, creating positive thoughts about the other person sometimes is that, well, they've gone through a hard time and this is how they know how to behave. Maybe they don't know any better. Maybe they're too young. Maybe they were hurt in the past as well. And that's not making excuses. That's just understanding their background, right? So as we let go of grudges, we'll no longer define our lives by how we've been hurt. And we may even find compassion and understanding. And that's when we have empathy, right? When we let go of grudges, or when we start to think about, this person hurt me, maybe because they were hurt or not, I'm choosing to let that go because I'm doing it for myself, not them. But also then going, they must have been in a really bad place to have done or said that, right? So letting go is very powerful, and it does take time. But what's also interesting to remember is that, there's a lot of interesting things about forgiving other people. But what about the process of self-forgiveness, right? Sometimes we've done things that we're not proud of. Sometimes we've done things that, we don't feel great about. And we need to remember that we're human. We need to decide or declare Oh, another user took control of this presentation. I need to take that back. Sorry, I don't know if anybody touched the button, but anyways, moving on. So, if there's somebody who's pushing the little square with the arrow on it, I really please need you to not touch it. Okay. Take back control. Okay, there's somebody who's taking control of my presentation, and so I need to take that that control back. Someone has cats. Maybe. Okay. So yes, here we go. That's interesting. So we need to upload a copy. Yeah. Okay. I apologize. I have no idea what just happened, so we'll just give it a moment. But when we're talking about self-forgiveness, think that we're human. We're allowed to make mistakes, and that sometimes we have to think about, you know, forgiving ourselves. I think we were on slide 20. Aha, here we go. Okay. All right. So decide to declare your intention to forgive yourself. Oops. And acknowledge that your actions and/or words hurt the other person and/or hurt yourself. And choose to consciously let go of your guilt. Sorry, no problem. It happens. I think I did it once too. It's all good. Now, this is something that we have to remind yourself that you made a choice to forgive yourself, and then when the feelings of guilt and regret resurface. This was something that, oh, thank you. I appreciate that you forgive me. That's so great. Or the person who did it. That's okay. So when we talk about self-forgiveness, we often hold on to guilt about doing things or saying things that we forget. And sometimes we remember, or we don't necessarily choose to ask for forgiveness or whatever. But we have to remember that we are human and that we make mistakes as well. Like I said, a few years ago, my daughter had a concussion, and it was very severe. And like I said, her personality was a complete change, and she was very angry, and she would say and do things that were hurtful because she had no filter. And, you know, as a parent, you sometimes take that personally, clearly. And of course, I would react or respond in ways that I wasn't always proud of. Every day I took my dog for a walk, and in the forest, I would tell the forest that, you know, I wasn't proud of my parenting moments, but I'm going to forgive myself for today, and I'm going to do a better job tomorrow. And tomorrow's, you know, always easier because it hasn't happened yet. And you know that tomorrow, there was, I don't know if any of you have seen Adam Green Gables, but tomorrow is always a fresh day with no mistakes. And this is where we can always start fresh. You know, I said this, or I did this, or I was triggered by this. Okay, tomorrow I'm going to say this or do this. I'm going to maybe practice my avoidance or escape strategies tomorrow, or I'm going to talk about the timeout process, because I think that next time this happens, I'm going to have to step away so I don't say or do things that I regret. So forgiveness is about forgiving others and about forgiving ourselves. So when we think about saying or doing things that we're not always proud of, failure is not a loss, it's a gain. You learn, you change, you grow. If you don't make mistakes, you don't learn anything, right? So let's talk about, so how do we feel about forgiveness? Is there any questions before we move on to the next chapter of this particular presentation? Oh, good. Yeah, the examples I have a lot, unfortunately, but it's always helpful to kind of think about how can I fit this into my own life, because it is sometimes hard to think or remember on the spot. Eventually they'll come up, but we have to sometimes think that they could be very broad, right, our examples. So when we think about, hopefully over the last 4 weeks, we have made some changes in our lives. And we all know that when it comes to anything, you know, whether we have a change in our exercise regime, or if we change, some people who quit smoking or who quit, you know, sugar, for example, we all have lapses and relapses, which means that we go back to our old behaviors. So when we think about our new patterns, maybe our new thought process, maybe some things that we've decided to do that are new, what are maybe some situations that might lead to lapses and relapses? What are some things that you think might make you go back to your old pattern of behavior? The environment. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Whether that's your physical environment, like your home, whether that's the outdoor environment, if you're stuck inside because it's snowing, for example, like the last 3 days, having continuous negative thoughts. Yes, right? Sometimes we can't control our thoughts. Well, we think that we can't control our thoughts, and negative always comes up, right? We have to think about what leads to those. A change in our routine, right? Triggers, allowing our anger to get the better of us. And that sometimes it happens, and remembering that that's okay. It happens to all of us, the best of us. I teach this and been teaching for 12 years, and it still gets the better of me sometimes, and that's okay. Not having support, that definitely helps, right? Not being human. These are all amazing. You guys are amazing. So just like we were saying, what are some things? Well, life stressors. When we were talking about whether it's a new home, whether you have a pet, a baby, whether you have children at home, your job, bad weather, debt, traffic, clutter, a pandemic, right? Anything is possible. Who would have thunk that we would have had a pandemic, right? None of us were prepared for that. But life stressors can definitely add to our lapses, relapses, our I guess our perceptions of life, or our choices, our stress levels, right? Now we don't have to worry about traffic as much, but not having a vaccine yet, so having to continue to wear masks. But there's so many different things that can happen that can just change our, like you were saying, our steady, our support, our patterns, our routines, things like eating habits or sleeping habits, whether we stop or start medication, whether there's an interruption in our treatments, right? Dealing with anti-vaxxers, oh dear. We're not even going to touch that. I think we just need to do an escape or avoidance strategy with anti-vaxxers. And when we talk about emergencies, the pandemic, right? Life changes, life stressors, it all fits in. And this is when we have to be very careful. And again, remembering that our bodies are going to talk to us, and we're going to start noticing when we go back to our old habits. So when we talk about a lapse, right? When we talk about the difference between a lapse and a relapse. So a lapse is a short-term single event, a thought, a belief, thinking error, a sensation, an emotion that's part of our anger cycle and a relapse pattern. So we know that maybe we used to, I don't know, yell, or we used to have road rage, or we used to, you know, do or say things before we remembered to take a step back, or to have a deep breath, or to do some kind of meditation. So a lapse is a single short-term event. And these are where we have to remember, uh-oh, I'm back into my old patterns. What am I going to do? Or what got me there? Why am I thinking like this again? Or why am I behaving like this again? Why did my mind go right to a negative thought versus a positive thought? So this is where it's almost like an indicator, because a relapse means that it's a longer term. There's multiple events. You're back to our old patterns of behavior. And when we go back to those patterns of behavior, it's because maybe we forgot to keep remembering our coping thoughts, or maybe we are not taking care of ourselves. Maybe we are forgetting to breathe, or maybe we're forgetting to get up and go for a walk. Maybe we're forgetting to ask for help, ask for support. And we have to remember that everyone lapses, right? This is right. Every time we think about, okay, you're on a healthy healthy eating kick. Well, everyone lapses and that's okay, right? But not everyone relapses. So catch yourself at the lapse stage to avoid a relapse. And this is when we really have to be aware of our bodies and our thought processes, right? So they're not failures. They can be valuable learning experiences. Ask yourself, why did I say that or do that? Why did I have a lapse? What's happening in my life right now? What are my triggers? What's going on? And really check in with yourself. We really, really need to be much more aware of what's happening in our lives. So this is the relapse prevention checklist. First thing, know your early warning signs. What are your warning signs? When do you know that you're starting to lose your positive, your new positive thought processes? Analyze the source of your anger. Write it down. What was the trigger? What was your thought? What were the actual feelings you were having? Was it anger? Was it hurt? Was it frustration? Was it disappointment? Right? Think about it. Break the cycle of your anger, aggressive behavior, right? Know the pattern. If you're going back into that pattern or cycle, step away, do the timeout, maybe go get some help, right? Talk to an EAP person, talk to a counselor, talk to your best friend, talk to your dog. They're very good listeners, but break the cycle, right? Take a timeout. Catch your thinking errors. What was I thinking? Why did I react negatively? Why did I, yell at my spouse when they didn't bring down the blue shirt? Well, maybe they just didn't hear me, remembering that, right? View anger generated situations as a problem that needs to be solved. Remember that when you get angry, it's because you need to fix the problem that caused you the anger. And then mentally and behaviorally rehearse handling difficult situations. So go back to, what are my coping strategies? Go back to, how can I handle this? What could you do to prevent an anger generating situation? Now, this is what's going to take us right back to the very beginning. We're going to go right back to day one. We're going to talk about our coping skills. And what were some of those coping skills that we learned? What are some of the coping skills that you have started using, right? Maybe put it in the chat for me and tell me, what were some of the things that you remember to do, or you remember to say to yourself, or what are some of the coping strategies that you have started using over the last 4 weeks? So just maybe, to jog your memory, some of them were to deep breathing. Excellent. Good. Tactical breathing. Good. Excellent. Okay, so that really helped. I'm glad. Realizing that a perception tends to get me angry. Aha, right? What thoughts am I thinking? Trying to readjust my sleep, reflect before acting. Good. So these are all really important things, and I like that you have been thinking about them. Wow, that's really too far. Kidding, my reaction is up to me. I love it. And Scotch helps too, right? Just kidding. So when you think about recognizing that this anger generating situation is a problem that needs to be solved, walking is excellent. Yes. Remember that self-care and stress management, like deep breathing, like you were saying, meditation, mindfulness, sleeping, a short verse or monologue. Excellent, right? Mindfulness, sleeping, eating well, being active, listening to music, doing yoga, time with friends. So very important to remember that you don't need to do this alone, right? Ask yourself first, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely, or are you tired? And that's typically when we think about, why is my kid having a tantrum right now? Well, typically because they're hungry, or they're angry, or they're tired, right? Adults have tantrums, they just don't necessarily always yell on the ground and kick their hands and feet. But when we think about when we're normally the most grumpy is typically when we're hangry or tired. And manage your perceptions. Ask yourself, what story am I telling myself? How am I seeing the situation, right? Why is this making me angry? Use a new coping thought, right? What coping thoughts have I decided to start using? Maybe the coping thought could be, what could my coping thought be? Maybe they don't know any better. Maybe our priorities are different. Is this worth getting angry over? Maybe they didn't hear me. So use my personal power grid, right? So find out in the mastery and acceptance phase, what can I do to change this situation? Or what can I let go of that I cannot change? Right? When we talked about that particular situation, is there one situation that I need to let go of? Do I need to let go of expecting someone to be home on time when they say they're going to be on time? Do I need to stop expecting that my kids are going to listen to me the first time I ask them to do something? You know, am I going to stop expecting that traffic is going to be traffic, and whether, you know, if I drive at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it'll just take me a little bit longer, right? Or maybe I need to use an avoidance or escape strategy. What can I use until I can solve the issue? And the other thing too is also creating a healthy lifestyle. What am I doing to look after myself right now? And we know that there's so much research that goes into 3 very important things to start with when it comes to having a healthy lifestyle. So, am I sleeping enough? Am I taking the time to rest? When we think about sleeping, we talked about having 7 hours of sleep so that we can recover, so that our mood can be better, so that we can manage our weight or manage building muscle. We can consolidate to memory, etc. Sleep is so important. Even when we talk about physical activity, have I got up for a walk today? And Canada's Physical Activity Guide recommends 150 minutes a week. So that's 5 days of 30 minutes, or even 7 days of 20 minutes. 20 minutes is not very much of time when we think about it. And it's, you know, for home anyways, and even if we do it in 10-minute bursts, physical activity is so important. It's called the magic pill. Physical activity can help things from mild to moderate depression, help with managing diabetes, help with even improving sleep, improving heart, any type of cardiovascular disease. So physical activity is something that's really important. So if you're not doing any of that, maybe even just start with 10 minutes, get your heart rate up a little bit. And napping is very nice too, as long as it doesn't affect your sleeping patterns, right? And we know eating habits are very important. And there's a lot more research now, and we actually have a full presentation on how eating can affect our mental health. Because we know that our body will make ourselves, right? We are made from what we eat. So if we eat healthy things that are close to the ground, not very processed, lower in sugar and salt and fats and stuff like that, that's what our cells are going to be made with. So we're going to have more energy. We're going to have, you know, things that are going to help us repair muscle mass and tissues. And, you know, depending on when we eat or what we eat or why we eat, you know, are we eating because we're bored? Are we eating because we're sad? Or are we eating because we're actually hungry? So all of those things work best when those 3 things are done together, because you can't have one without the other 2. Otherwise, they're almost obsolete. Okay, they need to be done together. So I'm going to try to play I love this video because it's so simple. It really means just stick to the basics, and that's what's really important about it. So that's kind of the closure, or we're getting close to the end of the last series, or the last of the 4th series, and just remembering again that the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. And that's again another thing that's really important, is that remembering that your mind is so powerful, and your mind can help with choosing to see things differently. So in a summary, when we talk about the series that we've done over the last 4 weeks, the first thing we learned was a definition of anger. What anger is, what anger isn't. Anger and stress and mental health are all linked, so they all need to be taken care of. Trigger thoughts and coping thoughts, right? We talked about what trigger thoughts could be, and we talked about what coping thoughts could be. And we talked about forgiveness, what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't. And how failure, single incident of short duration, which is not really a failure, it's a lapse. And a relapse is multiple incidents of long duration. So we talked about preventing relapses, and then all of the coping strategies that we have gone through since day 1. So I want to take the time to remind you that if you need to talk to somebody, there are some resources out there. We're always available. Health Promotion has a lot of great resources on their website. And I just, again, want to take the time to thank you so much for participating, for having come to the 4 workshops, for having chatted with me with the chat box. And I really hope that you take something from the 4 workshops that we've gone through together. I will be sending you an email, like I said, with all of the information on it. If you haven't been receiving them over the last 3 weeks, because I've been sending one once a week, please send me an email directly, because like I said, we're only using the email that we got as your registration, and that's really what we've been using. So if you haven't been receiving it, send me a direct email with that email that I just put in the chat, and I will put you in the list, of course. If you have any questions or comments, I'm going to stay back, and we can chat through the chat or whatever. So you're welcome, and I hope you have a great day, great week. Good luck with everything. Hopefully spring will come soon, and we'll be able to go outside and walk without any snow. So have a great time. Hopefully we'll see you at some other health promotion webinars. And I'm going to stop filming.